So, what's the topic of your sessions at the Cloud Summit?
Okay, so the topic I'm talking about is called the state of Azure infrastructure as code. So what we're going to be talking about really is how you can get started with doing things in infrastructure as code. So I'm a big believer in getting out of the portal, stopping clicking and using UIs and building your infrastructure using code. But if you want to get started down that path, it can be really confusing because nowadays there are so many different options in terms of what you can actually use, the different technologies available, and how do you actually choose which one to use and get started with them. So the session I'm delivering at the Cloud Summit, we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a look at what options are available, what they look like, what they have in terms of benefits and downsides, and then hopefully help you make a decision as to which tooling you might want to make use of. There are various different criteria that will drive you down the path of one tool or another. Things like, am I going to be deploying to multiple clouds? Do I need to get native support from the vendors? All those sort of things. So we'll have a look at what the criteria are and hopefully help you make a decision. And then we're also going to have a look at some real world projects as well that sort of highlight some of the advantages of different tooling.
So there's multiple tools. I'm assuming right now when you start a job, like a project, like could you help the viewers to how can someone know which one to pick?
Yeah, exactly. There are so many different tools, and so we've got things like the native providers from Microsoft, like ARM templates, and the new tooling called Bicep, and then you've got the third-party vendors like Terraform, Pulumi, and then some community projects like Farmer. And so these tools all have different abilities and different things that you can use them for. Things like if you look at ARM templates to start with, they're the native Microsoft toolkit, so they're built by Microsoft. And they usually have the new resources in them first. They're supported by Microsoft if you have a support contract. And so there's a lot of reasons why you might choose that if you're a Microsoft first shop and you're going to be deploying Azure resources and that's it. Whereas if you're going to be doing things where you're deploying to multiple different places, so Azure, but maybe other cloud providers, but maybe even other things like Kubernetes and GitHub and other things, it doesn't have to be multi-cloud. But then if you're going to do that, then you might want to look at a provider where it supports those multiple different offerings. So things like Terraform and Pulumi, where you can actually deploy to lots of different places. And then another option is, well, how do you actually want to write your code that you're deploying with? So things like ARM templates, you're writing JSON. Bicep is a move forward to that, to using more of a sort of less complicated DSL, but it's still a domain-specific language. Whereas something like Pulumi, you could write your code in any language. You could write it in Python, C#, TypeScript, all those sort of things. Or something like Farmer, where you can write it in what is effectively F#, but in a more user-friendly approach. So yeah, there's lots of different sort of criteria you might use to select the one you're going to use, and we'll go into a lot more detail of those in the session. But generally, there is going to be one or two things that jump out at you as these are what I'm, these are what going to drive me down this path or this path, and it will help you make your decision.
So we're just between friends now here. Like you mentioned not Blazor. You mentioned Biceps. Yeah, it's the last one to join the party. So what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, so Bicep is a really interesting project. It's sort of the next stage of ARM templates, and it's an interesting one because it's not a replacement for ARM templates. It's a language on top of ARM templates. So actually, when you write in Bicep, you are writing in its language, but when you come to deploy them, what you're actually deploying is ARM templates. That's what you get behind the scenes, but you don't have to be particularly involved with those. And so Bicep is a really good tool for somebody who's coming to doing infrastructure as code new, and particularly Azure infrastructure as code. ARM templates were great, but they had a really steep learning curve in terms of how you got to know the language. The scripts are quite verbose and long. If you're trying to debug a script as a newcomer, they can be quite complicated. Bicep takes away a lot of that complexity and makes it a lot easier to read, and more importantly, a lot easier to get started if you're coming to this for the first time. And that's really what the Bicep team were, or the ARM team, I guess, were aiming for, is to create a language that makes it easier for somebody to get into the topic. If you're already experienced and you're an expert at Terraform or something, that might not be for you. But that's that's not necessarily what they were designed for. It's really about how do you get the newcomers into the topic a lot easier and get people onboarded more quickly. And I think Bicep's a great tool for that.
And like you mentioned, it is the same team, right? That does ARM and Bicep. So it's really kind of a second tool.
Exactly. So all of the functionality that's in Bicep is utilizing ARM templates under the hood. So when you run the Bicep build command, it spits out a load of JSON for you at the end of it. So everything that's in Bicep is based on something that's in ARM, but it makes it a lot easier to use. So one great example is if you look at modules. So you could do a kind of modular approach with ARM templates. It was nested templates, but they were really hard to use and really hard to sort of follow through when you were trying to debug and all those sort of things. Whereas Bicep allows you to build modules, and they're you can sort of put them in their own file. You can import them into your templates. You can use them like modular code. They're really easy to sort of see in that way. But behind the scenes, what you get is a really big nested template. But you don't have to deal with any of that. It's all hidden from you. So it's quite a cool way of not having to rewrite the entirety of the Azure Resource Manager stack, but providing a much easier way for people to use it.
Really cool. And I understand that it depends on your project, but today, what's your language you pick?
Yeah, so it depends what I'm doing. So some of the community projects and stuff I do, Bicep is a great one, and I've been using that a lot recently. For my day job and work, I work a lot with developers who are really trying to push to write their own infrastructure as code. And so we've been using a lot of Pulumi for that because they can do that in their native programming language. They particularly use C#, but you can get them to write more things without having to learn a new language. But yeah, it depends what I'm doing really.
Fantastic. I see the time flying. So when people can catch you on the Cloud Summit?
Yeah, so my session is going to be on the afternoon of Thursday, the 23rd. So that's going to be about 4:30 UK time. I think it's about 11:30 East Coast US time. So I'll be doing my session there.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.